They called me home, sobbing about Dad's heart attack. I rushed over, only to be ambushed with papers to sign away my money. I pretended to sign and then dropped a bombshell that left everyone stunned. You should have seen their faces. Hey Reddit. I was 3 time zones away, just finishing a meeting when my phone rang nonstop. First my mother, then my sister, then my uncle. When I finally picked up, my mother was crying so loudly that I couldn't understand her. My sister grabbed the phone, crying that Dad had a heart attack and I needed to come home immediately. My heart nearly stopped. Without thinking, I booked the first red-eye flight home, my hands trembling the whole time. Dad and I hadn't always agreed, but he's still my father. If something happened to him, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself for not being there. I dropped everything, work, clients, a major deal I had been working on for months, and flew back to my childhood home, where things never really felt like home anymore. When I landed, there was no ambulance, no hospital update, no doctor waiting. Instead, my cousin Mark picked me up from the airport, unusually cheerful for someone who just lost sleep over a family emergency. When I asked him how Dad was doing, he hesitated before saying he was resting at home. The doctors said it wasn't a full heart attack, just a scare. But yeah, he's fine. His eyes didn't match his words, though. The way he kept glancing at me made me feel like I was walking into a trap. My instincts were screaming at me, but I shrugged it off as exhaustion. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that my family wouldn't lie about something like this. I couldn't have been more mistaken. I walked into the house expecting to see Dad hooked up to machines, maybe pale and weak, or even relieved to see me. Instead, my entire family was gathered around the dining table. Mom, Dad, my sister, my uncle, and even our lawyer. Right in front of them was a thick stack of papers. My dad looked fine, not great, but not like someone who had just survived a heart attack. He even nodded and said, "There he is. Took you long enough." I froze. What the heck was going on? They started talking quickly, too quickly, about inheritance, about the family business, about how I was the only one with assets not fully tied up in debt. They framed it as a desperate plea, saying the business was collapsing and Dad's health scare showed them they needed to get things in order. They insisted it would only be temporary, just a transfer of funds on paper for tax reasons, and that I could help the family by signing a few documents. The lawyer, clearly in on it, slid the papers in front of me as if it was all routine. But it wasn't routine, it was a setup. They weren't just asking for help. They were asking me to sign away nearly everything I had worked for over the past 10 years. My condo, my investment accounts, my share in my tech firm. All of it bundled into neat paragraphs disguised as helping the family business survive. One glance told me everything I needed to know. If I signed, I'd lose control. My assets would legally become theirs, and if they defaulted, which they definitely would, I'd be left with nothing. This wasn't about Dad's health. This was about draining the one family member who had managed to escape. The one who had made something of himself without sinking with the ship. My relationship with my family had always been complicated. Growing up, I was the black sheep, the one who didn't want to work in the family business, the one who left home early, the one who pursued tech instead of tradition. They treated my success with a strange mix of envy and disdain. I didn't marry young like my sister. I didn't fit into the family mold. I built my own life, one that was finally stable, thriving, even. And now, the same people who had mocked me for years were suddenly smiling at me like we were best friends, as if the past didn't exist, as if we were just one big happy family, and I wasn't being baited with emotional manipulation. I noticed how my mom suddenly wasn't crying anymore, how my dad wouldn't meet my gaze, how my sister kept talking over me, offering coffee, laughing too loudly, doing anything to mask the tension. I remember looking around the room and realizing that this wasn't desperation, it was calculation. They knew I'd come. They were counting on it, and they had rehearsed this moment like a play. Each of them had a role: my uncle, the peacemaker, my mom, the emotional anchor, my sister, the friendly distraction. Even the lawyer knew when to nod and reassure me that it was all standard procedure. But none of them were prepared for the fact that I had dealt with investors who were more ruthless than any of them. I had sat across from CEOs who would do anything for a stock boost. This wasn't a family meeting. It was a corporate ambush disguised as love. I smiled, took the pen, and pretended to sign. The room let out a collective sigh of relief. My sister even clapped her hands and said, "That wasn't so hard, was it?" I leaned back and said, "Nothing." Just looked around the room. Then I calmly pushed the documents back toward the lawyer and said, "Oh, by the way, these signatures are fake. You might want to double-check before you submit them." The silence was immediate, the kind that makes your ears ring. My mother's face fell like a broken mask. My sister turned beet red. Dad finally looked at me, and the anger in his eyes said everything. Not guilt, not shame, just fury that I didn't fall for it. Then I stood up and walked toward the door. Before I left, I turned around and said the words I had been holding on to since I realized the entire thing was a setup. I flew across the country because I thought my father was dying. You manipulated my love for this family to try and steal from me. Don't ever call me again unless it's about a real emergency. And next time, get better actors. This whole thing was pathetic. As I reached the front door, my uncle called out, "Wait, we can explain." I didn't even look back. I walked out of that house and slammed the door behind me. But I didn't go back to my hotel. I went straight to the bank because if they were this desperate, there was more going on than I realized. The people I once trusted with my childhood might be gearing up to try something even worse. I wasn't just going to walk away this time. I was going to find out how deep this betrayal ran. And if I was right about what I saw in those documents, then this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about war. The next morning, I was still running on adrenaline and 3 hours of sleep. I couldn't shake the look in my father's eyes when I told him I had faked the signature. It wasn't the look of a man caught in a bad moment. It was the look of someone who had been planning that moment for weeks, maybe months. The fake heart attack, the scripted urgency, the stack of documents, all carefully worded to transfer liability. And suddenly, I couldn't help but wonder how many times they had rehearsed it before I arrived. How long had they been counting on me to fall for it? I needed answers, real ones. So I skipped breakfast, ignored the phone calls and voicemails they were already flooding me with, and went straight to the one person I knew had a reason to talk, my cousin Mark. Mark wasn't a mastermind. He was just a follower, a sheep in whatever scheme the rest of the family came up with. But he wasn't malicious, just weak. I caught him outside a cafe near the edge of town, waiting for his breakfast sandwich like it was any other normal day. When he saw me approaching, his face turned a shade paler than cream. He didn't run. He didn't lie, not because he was brave, but because he was too naive to know how deep he was in. I didn't even ask questions. I just stared at him for a full minute, arms crossed while he fumbled with his coffee, trying to pretend this wasn't happening. Eventually, he cracked and told me everything. The family business had been losing money for years. My dad had made a series of terrible investments, some legal, some dangerously not. A warehouse deal gone wrong. A shell company in Nevada that vanished overnight. A silent partner who had been siphoning off funds without anyone catching on until it was too late. They'd mortgaged nearly every asset. The house, the vacation home, the land Dad inherited from his grandfather. It was all leveraged to the hilt. Then there was the lawsuit, one I had never even heard of. A former employee had filed a whistleblower claim about tax fraud and falsified earnings. The company was under investigation, and a huge judgment was expected. If they lost, it would bankrupt the family and open the door for criminal charges. That's why they needed my assets, not for the company, but for themselves, to keep them out of jail, to prevent the feds from freezing what little they had left. I walked out of that cafe feeling nauseous. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at nothing for a solid 5 minutes. Everything I had grown up around, my parents, my sister, the business, the home I thought I'd one day inherit, it was all fake now. Just a facade held together by lies and the expectation that blood means you're supposed to sacrifice everything, even your own sanity, for family. But they had stopped being my family the moment they weaponized my love for them. When they turned me into an ATM with a heartbeat, that's when I knew what I had to do. I had to burn it all down. I went straight to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one I'd worked with for years in my company. Trusted, smart, and cutthroat when needed. I laid out everything. The documents they tried to make me sign, the potential fraud, the fabricated health emergency. She listened without flinching. Then she told me something that changed everything. If they tried to forge my signature or submitted even one version of those papers as legal and binding, it could be considered fraud. And if they used those documents in any financial transaction, it would open them up to investigation, possibly even criminal charges. She asked me for copies, and I gave them to her. She said she'd take it from there and that I should stay quiet, watch, and wait. So I did. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the same lawyer. Quiet voice, simple sentence. They tried to use the papers. They submitted them to a private lender, claiming they had my full backing. The lender got suspicious and ran a verification process. They found the mismatched signatures, the trail of inconsistencies, enough to freeze the transaction and report it to the authorities. My family's desperation had finally pushed them too far. And this time it was documented, provable, real. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. But I did show up at their house one last time. Not to scream or argue, just to say what I needed to say. They opened the door like they were seeing a ghost. I told them I knew everything. The lawsuit, the debt, the fraud, the lies. All of it was out. The investigation had already begun. The only reason I hadn't pressed full charges myself was that I wanted to walk away clean. Not with revenge, but with peace. I told them I'd be cutting all legal and financial ties permanently, that I was updating my will, my account protections, and freezing any asset that had even a hint of family connection. And if I ever heard from them again, I'd go public with everything. My mother cried. My sister begged. My dad didn't say a word. He just stared at me like I had killed something sacred. Maybe I had, but it wasn't love I killed. It was their last illusion of control. That day, I stopped being their golden goose. I became the consequence they thought would never come. I walked away and never looked back. Since then, my life has been quieter, not easy. Letting go of your family, no matter how toxic, is like amputating a limb you grew up depending on. It aches, especially during holidays. But you know what doesn't ache? My bank account, my peace of mind, my mornings without dread. I still get updates sometimes, bits of gossip from old neighbors or distant cousins. The business went under. The lawsuit is still pending. My sister moved in with a friend. My parents sold the house. None of it surprises me. They built their world on lies and thought I'd hold it up forever. But I'm done holding things that were never mine to carry. In the end, family isn't about blood. It's about respect, boundaries, and love that doesn't come with strings attached. Once you learn that, you stop chasing ghosts and houses that were never homes.